I pin the veil to my daughter's hair and the room goes quiet in that way. A room does when fabric absorbs sound. The machines hum in the back, the air conditioner breathes against my neck, the bulb in the corner flickers and steadies. Eliza stands in front of the 3-panel mirror, all pale silk and long arms, 16 going on 20, trying not to smile because she thinks pretending to be a bride is childish. A thin scratch runs down the center pane, a hairline seam I keep meaning to polish out. Light hits it and turns it into a silver thread. "Why don't you have any wedding photos?" she asks, almost casual, like she's asking for a charger. Her voice is dry from the air. I hear the question anyway, the way a body hears a blow. The small key that lives on a chain at my throat slips from my collar and taps the glass. And the sound is too bright, like a dropped pin in a church. My hands know what to do, even when my lungs don't. I smooth the veil. I press the comb deeper. I say nothing because the true answer is lodged at the back of my tongue like a fishbone. Because I was a runaway bride. The room smells like starch and clean cotton and the faint lemon of the polish we use on the dress forms. There's a new roll of muslin on the cutting table, and its paper sleeve crackles when the vent shivers. Beneath my palms, the veil has a grain I could follow. Blindfolded. I've lived my adult life reading fabric the way other people read faces. Somewhere down the hall, the steamer coughs. My heart is beating in my throat, in my wrists, in the soft web of skin between my thumb and finger. Eliza steadies herself, then me, then the thin white seam of the mirror's flaw. She's tall enough now that I can see my own face tucked in the corner of the left panel, the way a stranger might catch herself in a shop window. I look like someone who should have an answer ready. Instead, I adjust the comb again. Then I reach for the hem to fan it, and something slides out from the underside and skids onto the floor. It's a Polaroid, not one of mine. Mine are labeled in pencil and clicked into albums. This one is bent at the corner, and the ink has bled where a drop of something— rain? Sweat? Hid before it dried. The white border is smudged gray. I recognize it before I pick it up, the way you recognize the low murmur of your own name in a crowded room. I recognize it because it used to live in my nightmares and in the glove compartment of a car I no longer own. I recognize it because there, in a dress I never wore down an aisle, is a girl turned away from a church door in Maine. Hair pinned but not covered, hands empty, mouth open like she might laugh or cry. No one can tell. My fingers don't want to close on it, but they do. For a second I feel the texture of old instant film, waxy, soft. Then I feel my skin go cold. The photo is the color of old milk and weather. Behind the girl, the wooden steps are wet. August rain. The edges of the hydrangeas are singed brown from salt wind. In the far right corner there's the edge of a sleeve, a man's, and the cuff is monogrammed N. R. The initials are just a blur to anyone else. Not to me. "Is that you?" Eliza asks. Not curious, careful. She knows a brittle thing when she hears it flex. I don't nod. I don't shake my head. The air slips wrong into my lungs, and I put the photo down on the pressing table, the way you put down something hot. The key at my throat is cool against my sternum now, a coin I could spend if I had the nerve. I don't look at Eliza because if I do, I will have to choose a story. I have always told other people's stories well. It is my living. People hire me to repair heirloom gowns and to stage the first moment two people see each other on their wedding day, to make it look like destiny instead of good lighting and timing and a quiet cue in the earpiece. I can make a hallway smell like orange blossoms in December with 3 drops of oil and an oscillating fan. I can press a crease into a suit that says the wearer has never once sat down in a hurry. I can tell a bride where to put her hands so that her grandmother's ring catches the sun. I have not, until this minute, told my daughter why I keep the gash in the mirror and the key on the chain and the box in the back room that no one is allowed to open. The veil settles. Eliza tilts her head and the tool breathes. In the mirror, she is 3 girls at once, front, left, right. And in each she looks a little different. In the middle she's serious, on the left she's a child, on the right she's the woman who will roll this day on her tongue someday to see what flavor it had. My reflection is the same in all 3. A woman holding a secret that has been running laps in her chest for 17 years and has finally come to the door, panting. I hear myself swallowing. I hear the small groan of the dress form behind us shifting as the building settles. I hear the timer in the workroom beep, someone's tea is done, and the silence that follows when no one goes to fetch it. Outside, traffic ticks. A bicycle bell. Someone laughs hard, then stops. Go put that there, I say, and my voice doesn't sound like mine. It sounds like the version of me who stayed. This veil hasn't been out of storage since. I stop. I don't have to count. I know exactly how many years have stretched, thin and stubborn as sugar pulled to glass, between the door of that church and this room. Eliza steps off the platform and the veil drifts. She doesn't touch the photo. Her eyes are on me, not the picture, and it feels like standing in a spotlight I didn't set. You look scared, she says softly. Is it bad? It's old, I say, which is not the same thing. Old isn't always bad. Her mouth tilts. Is that why you never talk about it? Because it's old? Because I didn't want you to inherit it. Because some stories stain everything they touch, even when you wash them in the best light. Because if I say it out loud, it becomes a thing you can ask me again and again, and I will have to keep saying it, and the saying will make it more real than the leaving ever did. The reasons queue up, polite and useless. I pick up the photo again. The girl in it is not quite me, and entirely me. She is about to do something irreversible, and she already has. Behind her in that picture, there was a room with a lock on the money, and a ledger with a neat hand, and a mother-in-law who liked to call women girls when she asked them to sign things. There was a man who could make a toast sound like a closing argument. There were flowers imported out of season on a bill that did not have my name on it. My palms leave a clean oval on the dusty table. Eliza moves back onto the platform and faces the mirror again, shoulder blades squared like she's bracing for wind. You always say truth looks good under bright light, she says. You say that to brides when they're scared. I did say that. I do say that. I believe it even when I can't live it. It does, I manage, but it still stings the eyes. Another breath. My fingers find the comb at the crown of her head and anchor it a little deeper. I am steady now. I wasn't back then. The photo lies between us, the way a dropped glove does, neutral until someone claims it. I don't know who tucked it into this veil, or how it found its way across state lines and years to land on my floor, but it has the weight of intention. Of a message. Of a trap. Eliza's eyes meet mine in the center panel. She is really looking now, not at the dress or the seam or the stray hair at her jaw, but at me. I could pick a lie with clean edges and bright paint. I could say, I lost the pictures in a flood or a move or a fight. I could say I didn't like how I looked that day. My mouth opens, and for a second I can feel the old door under my palm, the one with the brass plate warm from the sun and the latch that stuck unless you pulled up and then in. I can feel the rain at the neck of my dress and the taste of salt on my lip where I bit it. I can hear a bell. Not this bicycle bell outside. Another bell, tighter, the kind you ring to start something. I make first looks for a living, I say. To my daughter and to the woman in the glass. But all my life, I've been dodging the first look that mattered. I don't look away. Not this time. I stage the moment strangers meet each other for the first time. But for most of my life, I've avoided meeting my own eyes. I run a place called First Light. People think it's a wedding studio, but what I really sell is memory control. We restore vintage wedding dresses, 38 a year on average, 128,000 in revenue if the season is kind. 70% of my clients add the first look direction, package. 2 hours, 2,500 flat, where I choreograph that cinematic moment the bride and groom see each other for the first time. I adjust posture, background light, breath, heartbeat. It's half therapy, half stagecraft. Every invoice is precise, every minute logged. I can tell you how much the softbox rental costs per watt, how many stitches a 1963 lace panel takes to secure, how many seconds of eye contact make people believe in forever. Numbers are my cleanest language. And still, behind every ledger line, there's the ghost of the girl who ran. Eyes paid other people's debts longer than I paid my own. $42,300 to the conservatory for Liam. The son Nate had before me, the one who calls me Maeve, but texts Mom when he needs tuition. $1,200 a month for 6 years for the attic flat. Eliza and I rented after the divorce. I can price every chapter of survival down to cents, but not the silence between. When clients walk in, they see a woman who measures life in fabric widths and lighting temperatures. They don't see the part of me that counts the cost of breathing beside the wrong man. 2008. Back then, I was 28 and thought love was an exam I could study for. Nate Rourke was a lawyer just promoted, the kind who corrected people's grammar even when they were crying. He said my hands were surgical, and my eyes detail-oriented. Compliments that sounded like job references. He liked that I never argued about restaurants or seating charts. I mistook that for harmony. The morning of the wedding, Maine was drowning in sunlight. The church smelled of lemon polish and lilies, and every surface gleamed like it had been scrubbed to prove a point. In the bride's room, a 3-panel mirror waited, the kind that makes you dizzy because it multiplies you. I saw myself tripled, the obedient one in the middle, the quiet one on the left, the one already halfway turned toward the door on the right. That was when Margaret Rourke, my almost mother-in-law, glided in. Pearls, beige perfume, the sort of smile that lands like a fingerprint. She carried a folder wrapped in tissue paper. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "before things get busy, could you sign this? It's about the wedding gifts. We'll route everything through the family account, makes taxes easier." Her voice was honey, poured through a sieve. Slow, warm, leaving nothing behind. I took the pen. My palms were slick. I kept wiping them on the dress. "This is a power of attorney?" She laughed without teeth. "Just a formality. Don't be difficult on your big day. Konga Ingon doesn't question her family." She used that phrase, good daughter, like a leash. I signed. The ink blot spread like a bruise under my name. Later, when the florist delivered extra roses we hadn't ordered, I tried to pay and was told, "Mr. Rourke handled it." The photographer slipped me a note about payment going through the hall. Everyone smiled as if the machine were already running. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself again, veil pinned, face blank, eyes wrong. 3 women stared back. The bride, the clerk, the fugitive. I didn't know which one would make it to the aisle. That afternoon, I went to the restroom to breathe and found the key to the bridal suite still in my pocket. It was brass, heavy, with a tag engraved Rourke Hall, the side room where the envelopes were being stacked in silver trays. I rolled it in my palm. The metal left a crescent dent in my skin. Outside, the organist was rehearsing Ave Maria. Every note sounded like a countdown. I told myself I was just nervous, that every bride doubts. I told myself it was normal not to feel your own feet. I told myself love was compromise, and compromise was supposed to hurt a little. But when I stepped back into the mirror room, the reflection had shifted. The middle woman had vanished. Only the quiet one and the one facing the door remained. I laughed, too loud, too brittle, and said to no one, "You're being dramatic, Maeve." "Maybe just hungry." Yet the key pressed deeper into my palm, and the girl in the right panel smiled faintly, like she knew exactly which way we were about to run. When I was 23, I thought skill could protect me from everything. That was the year I apprenticed at Lillian & Sons, a restoration workshop that smelled of steam, starch, and old hope. The place was a labyrinth of dress forms and bolts of tulle. Every gown that came through the door carried somebody's wish sewn into its hem. My first assignment was to re-stitch the waist seam of a wedding dress from 1954, a pale champagne satin that had belonged to a widow named Agnes Leary. Her hands shook when she brought it in. She said she wanted to wear it again for a photograph with her grandchildren. When I bent close to the fabric, she reached out and caught my wrist. "Don't let anyone sew your mouth shut with white thread, child," she whispered. "That's how they make you smile for pictures." The needle stopped in midair. I didn't know what she meant then, not fully, but I tucked the sentence inside me like a lucky coin. Years later, it would clink every time someone told me to be nice. At the end of each day, We swept the floor with stiff horsehair brooms. The lint floated up like snow and caught in her eyelashes. I loved the quiet rhythm of it, the hiss of steam, the pop of the thread breaking, the way the iron sighed when it cooled. It felt honest. Everything we did left a visible mark, a seam, a patch, a line of top stitching that said, "I was here, I fixed this." By then, Eliza was 3, all curls and questions, living with me in a single-room apartment above a laundromat. On nights when the dryers downstairs rattled the floorboards, she called them giant hearts. One summer storm knocked the power out for hours. The machines went silent, the street went black, and the air smelled of wet concrete and soap. I spread a roll of tulle across the cutting table, clipped the ends with pins, and draped it over 2 stools to make a tent of stars. I set a small flashlight inside, so its beams scattered across the fabric in constellations of dust. Eliza crawled in first, clutching her stuffed fox. "See what brides wear?" she asked. "Something like it." I lay beside her. The flashlight hummed, catching the sheen of her hair. "Do you like weddings, Mama?" The question was so soft, it nearly disappeared into the rain on the window. I thought of the women who brought their dresses to the shop, their faces when they handed them over, their relief when we returned the gowns whiter, smaller, perfect again. I thought of how many times I'd seen a man's name stitched inside the lining instead of the woman's. "I do," I said finally, "but I like truth better." She frowned as if truth were a color she hadn't seen yet. "Does truth sparkle?" "Not always," I told her. "Sometimes it just fits." She giggled and pointed at the shifting dots of light. "It'll wear that." We fell asleep under the veil. When I woke before dawn, the flashlight had died and the world was blue with early morning. Eliza's small hand rested on my arm, her fingers still sticky from the marshmallow we'd shared. I remember thinking that this quiet moment between storms was a kind of vow too. One that didn't need witnesses or signatures. The next day, at the shop, I snapped a Polaroid of Eliza perched on a crate, pretending to hem a sleeve with a blunt needle. The picture came out blurred, the colors washed to pastel, but her grin was perfect. Wide, tooth gap, fearless. I kept it clipped to the edge of my work table as proof that something in my life was real and unfinished and mine. Years later, when clients ask why I still shoot film in a world of high definition, I tell them it's because Polaroids forgive motion. They capture you between poses, where the truth usually lives. That first photo has faded now, the whites turning to cream, the edges curling like lace, but the smile hasn't moved. Every time I look at it, I can hear Agnes's tremor of a voice and Eliza's small question braided together. "Don't let them sew your mouth shut." "Do you like weddings?" "I do, but I still like the truth more." A week after the storm that knocked out our streetlights, I was back in the studio, fitting satin sleeves for a client whose life looked like an algorithm's dream. Aubrey Vale. 2 million followers, fiancé with a vineyard, sponsorships lined up like pearls on a string. She called her wedding a collaboration. When she walked in, the room brightened the way ring lights do, flat but relentless. Her assistant balanced an iced latte on one hand and a phone on the other, narrating every movement. I was tightening the corset laces when Aubrey looked at herself in the 3-panel mirror and said, "Half to me, half to the reflection. Did you hear? Nate Rourke is sponsoring the Bridal Expo next month. That's insane, right?" The name landed like a dropped spool of thread, rolling somewhere I couldn't reach. My fingers froze at the small of her back. She mistook my silence for awe. "Everyone says he's a total gentleman. He even helped negotiate my PR contract." I swallowed air that felt sharp. In the mirror, a flash of sunlight slid across the old scratch in the center pane, splitting my reflection down the middle. It looked like a blade catching light. "That so?" I said, pretending to check the hem. My voice came out even. Years of practice. She kept talking, something about hashtags, destination shoots, a drone shaped like a dove. But I barely heard. The pulse in my neck had its own rhythm. By the time she left, the studio smelled of her perfume. Sweet, synthetic, expensive. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it until my knees remembered how to hold me. That night, while exporting photos from another shoot, my inbox pinged. The subject line was a whisper in lowercase. First look is a lie. No sender, no signature. Just an attachment. I almost deleted it spam, I thought, but curiosity has its own gravity. The file opened to a Polaroid. The same one Eliza had found tucked in the veil. The colors were more decayed here, the edges eaten by time, but there I was again. A woman in half-worn lace, face turned away, mid-stride down the church steps. In the corner, barely legible, 2 initials had been pressed into the emulsion with a ballpoint pen. N. R. My stomach went cold. For a long time I just stared at it, waiting for my pulse to catch up with what my eyes knew. Then I laughed, short and brittle. So that's what this is, I said out loud to the empty room. A publicity stunt. I told myself someone must have found an old archive photo, run it through an editing filter, tried to bait me into some influencer drama. A smear campaign, I thought. Maybe a competitor. Maybe a joke. Still, I checked the file properties. No sender address, no metadata, no trace. Clean, too clean. Outside, the street lamps buzzed. The last train out of Portland howled its horn across the river, a sound too close to a human cry. I sat back in the chair, eyes on the gash of the mirror across the room. In its reflection, my monitor glowed pale blue. The line of light from the crack sliced my face neatly in two. I could almost hear Agnes's old warning again, don't let anyone sew your mouth shut with white thread. I pressed, delete, emptied the trash, and unplugged the computer. Then I said the words that always come before trouble. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. But the air in the studio had shifted. The mannequins stood like witnesses. Somewhere behind the wall, a pipe knocked twice slow, deliberate, almost like someone knocking to be let back in. The bridal expo was supposed to be neutral ground lace and laughter, champagne and contracts. A trade fair for vendors, not ghosts. Still, I dressed like armor. Tailored black, minimal jewelry, the small silver key on a chain tucked beneath my collar. Eliza came with me. She was curious to see what I actually did for a living. Just stand near the booth, I told her. Smile if anyone asks for photos. The convention hall pulsed with music, all synth strings and artificial excitement. Hundreds of brides, to be glided between displays of calligraphy and cake samples. The air smelled of roses, frosting, and ambition. Our first light booth sat near the main stage. Too close, as it turned out. From there I could see the giant mirrored backdrop framed by fairy lights, the kind of thing meant to double every sparkle. I didn't realize yet how literal that doubling would become. At 7 p.m., the host, a man in sequins, tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor our patrons of happiness, those who make every love story possible. Applause. Spotlights flared. I was tightening the ribbon on a mannequin when the first name cut through the noise. Corporate sponsor, Rourke and Vale Partners. Represented by attorney Nate Rourke and influencer Aubrey Vale. The room went syrup slow. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, that my brain was rearranging syllables into something crueler. But the crowd turned toward the stage, and there he was. Nate. Hair a little grayer at the temples, still perfect. Smile rehearsed to the millimeter. Standing beside him, Aubrey, gleaming in a sequined jumpsuit, waving like a debutante at her own coronation. The spotlight slid across the mirrored backdrop, and my own reflection stared back at me from its shards. I could see the line of the old crack down the center. Just a decoration, I told myself, part of the design. Eliza's hand found mine. Mom, she whispered, is that? Yes. My voice broke on the consonant. The host read a short biography. Nate Rourke, esteemed family law attorney, philanthropist, advocate for ethical partnerships. I almost laughed at that, could feel it bubbling, hysterical and ugly, behind my ribs. When it was his turn to speak, Nate took the microphone with the ease of someone used to winning. Marriage, he began, isn't about the perfect moment. It's about courage. Some people have it. He paused just long enough to sip champagne. And some people spend their lives staging it for others. The crowd tittered. A ripple of polite laughter rolled through the hall. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Eliza's grip tightened. I know someone like that. Nate continued, still smiling. Brilliant at making others look brave. Not so good at being brave herself. More laughter. A few heads turned toward me. Tiny, curious movements, like birds catching scent of blood. I should have walked out. I should have turned off the lights at my booth, led Eliza to the exit, and never looked back. But my legs locked. It was the kind of paralysis that comes not from fear, but recognition. The body remembering exactly how it felt to freeze once before, at the top of a church aisle 17 years ago. On stage, Aubrey leaned toward Nate's microphone. He's too modest. He even helped me rewrite my vows for the campaign. He grinned. Old habits. The room sparkled with camera flashes. My heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the shutters. Click, 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 like scissors through satin. Then came the sound, a clean, bright titch, sharp enough to slice through applause. The massive decorative mirror wall behind the stage cracked, a thin silver vein running from top to bottom. The light caught it and scattered into 100 splinters that danced across the crowd. Some people gasped, others clacked, thinking it part of the show. But I felt the vibration in my chest, the echo of that earlier Polaroid burning behind my eyes. Eliza looked up at me, her face pale in the reflected lights. Mom, are you okay? I wanted to say yes. Instead, I whispered, it's just glass. Yet the crack kept widening, quiet but unstoppable, like something finally exhaling after years of being held. Nate raised his glass again, pretending not to notice. To second chances, he said, and to those who teach us what not to do. The audience laughed, oblivious. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The key at my throat felt suddenly heavy, the chain biting into skin. Somewhere between the first toast and the last applause, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage exactly, or humiliation. It was clarity, the slow, blinding kind that arrives too late and too loud. Because in that moment, watching him bask under chandeliers he hadn't paid for, hearing my own story twisted into a punchline, I understood that he'd never stopped using my name. Not in contracts, not in rumors, not in the quiet rooms where deals were signed. He was still cashing in on the woman who ran. When the ceremony ended, the crowd surged toward the champagne bar. Eliza tugged my hand, but I couldn't move. My reflection shimmered in the fractured mirror behind Nate, split into fragments that no longer aligned. For the first time, the woman looking back didn't seem trapped. She looked furious and awake. And in the slice of mirror that caught Nate's profile, I saw what he didn't. The hairline crack spreading behind him like lightning, a single line of truth waiting for light. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of the story. He'd told it wrong for 17 years. Now it was my turn. That night, the studio was a shell of itself, dark except for the strip of security light that cut across the floor like a measuring tape. The mannequins stood in rows, still wearing half-finished gowns, their shadows long and headless. I turned the key in the lock and stepped inside. The air was heavy with starch and silence. The mirrored wall reflected the shape of me that I hardly recognized anymore. Woman, mother, prop master of other people's fairy tales. I walked straight to the small safe in the back office. The keypad blinked green, obedient. Inside were ledgers, a stack of receipts, a velvet box with a broken brooch, and a single folder marked Rourke. I pulled out my laptop. The numbers were all there, tidy, automatic transfers. $900 a month to the Liam Rourke Music Scholarship Fund. The same account I'd kept alive even after the divorce, long after Liam had graduated and stopped sending thank you notes. The cursor hovered over cancel recurring payment. My finger trembled only once. Click. A small confirmation window popped up. Are you sure? Yes, I said aloud, to no one. Then I moved to the next item, the supplementary credit card Nate had insisted I keep for emergencies. I'd never used it, he had. A handful of restaurant charges, a boutique hotel in Chicago, something labeled consulting dinner. I told myself it wasn't my business. That was the worst lie of all. I selected freeze account. Click. For the first time in years, my financial dashboard looked clean empty even, but it felt like oxygen. I pushed the chair back and caught my reflection in the office mirror. The light was harsh, showing every line around my mouth, every sleepless year. For a long time I just stared at her. At me. Maeve, I said quietly, do you owe anyone anything else besides yourself? The woman in the mirror didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of the cutting table. The silence was too big, so I filled it with questions, the ones that had been waiting. Will I teach my child to answer his questions, or continue to teach him to be quiet? Every time Eliza asked about my wedding, I changed the subject. I told her fairy about lace and love instead of the tales about truth contracts and control. Silence had seemed safer, but silent breeds inheritance. She deserved better than the habit of keeping still. If I don't cut it, will I pay the rest of my life for sarcasm? I can still hear Nate's toast echoing through the hall. Some people don't have the courage to marry, so they choreograph it for others. I'd been paying interest on that sentence for 17 years. Every automatic transfer, every polite nod to the past, was another installment. Do I choose real or beautiful? In my world, beauty was precise, a flawless seam, a perfect hem, a lie you could wear. But truth had its own pattern, rough and uneven. The night I wanted that pattern. Do I dare appear in my first photo? I'd spent my life hiding behind the camera, behind the brides, behind the mirror. Maybe it was time to stand in front of it. Blurred, imperfect, unedited, but there. I stood, turned off the desk light, and went back into the fitting room. The 3-panel mirror waited, glinting faintly. The crack down its center looked like a vein of mercury. I touched it with one finger. The glass was cool, but not dead. I fetched the small tin of silver paint from the shelf, the one we used to edge antique buttons, and dipped a fine brush into it. Slowly, carefully, I traced the line of the fracture. The paint shimmered, a thin metallic scar. It didn't hide the break, it crowned it. Then I moved to the door and took out my screwdriver. The old lock came off with a sigh, screws rolling onto the floor like spilled beads. I replaced it with a new deadbolt, solid steel. The sound of it clicking into place was louder than I expected. Final. Satisfying. One by one, I turned off the rest of the lights. The mannequins disappeared into shadow. The silver line on the mirror caught the last of the glow and held it, bright as thread through fabric. When I reached the door, I looked back once. The studio seemed smaller now, almost intimate. I thought of all the years I'd bent over dresses to fix other people's mistakes, patching tears they never even saw. No more. From tomorrow, no more invisible mending. No more repairing illusions for men who profited from them. I locked the door, slipped the new key into my pocket, and said it out loud quietly but certain. From tomorrow, I will not sow lies anymore. For 3 days, Eliza said nothing. No slammed doors, no teenage huffs, just a silence so complete it had weight. She moved around the apartment like a ghost that didn't want to startle the living. On the first morning, she left her breakfast untouched. On the second, I found her shoes lined neatly by the door, soles still wet from the rain. On the third, I came home to find the teacup on my desk, empty, cold. She always brewed lotus tea for me when she studied late. Tonight, the air carried no trace of it, only the faint metallic tang of distance. I sat on the edge of the couch, listening. The apartment had its own language, the hum of the refrigerator, the clack of the heater pipes, the rhythm of her slippers dragging softly across the hallway floor. That rhythm changed now. It stopped right outside my door, then turned away. At 9 that night, the phone rang. Carter? The voice was male, polite, too smooth. This is regarding the sponsorship paperwork you signed for the expo. We're finalizing the media rights transfer, just confirming your consent? I didn't sign anything, I said. A pause. A small click, as if he'd smiled against his teeth. That's curious. We have your initials on the document. Perhaps you forgot? I could hear typing in the background. Then, if you'd rather not complicate this, Mrs. Carter, there are ways to settle quietly. It would be unfortunate if certain details became public. Especially to your daughter. My mouth went dry. Who are you? But the line had already gone dead. Seconds later, a text arrived. No name, just gray words on white screen. If you keep insisting, we'll tell her the truth ourselves. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Outside, wind scraped against the windows like something looking for a way in. The truth. The word had teeth. They thought that word was their weapon. They didn't understand it had already bitten me years ago. In the mirror above the mantel, my reflection looked smaller, edges blurred by the low light. I remembered the silver seam I'd painted across the studio mirror. A thin, shining scar. Felt like a promise. I didn't sleep. I walked the apartment instead, barefoot, tracing Eliza's route from the kitchen to her room, to the door where she'd paused and turned away. Every small detail seemed louder in the silence. The tick of the clock, the soft thud of my own heart. When I reached her door, I hesitated. Light leaked from the gap at the bottom, steady, bluish. She was awake. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped. Through the thin wood I could hear the faint rustle of pages, the sigh of her pen. She was writing, journaling maybe, the way I used to before all of this started. I lowered my hand. If she wanted quiet, she would have it, for now. Back in my room, I opened my laptop again. The cancelled transfers, the frozen card, the ledgers, they were all there, clean as a wound cauterized. But the email inbox was fuller now. 3 new messages from addresses I didn't recognize. Subject lines: photo licensing agreement, urgent, press quote, attribution correction. We can help you tell your side. I closed the lid. Somewhere beneath the fear, something steadier began to form. Not anger yet, but the shape of it, the way thunder shapes air before the storm hits. They thought I'd fold, the way I used to. They thought I'd hide behind my daughter's quiet the way I'd hidden behind my own. They thought I'd trade my silence for their version of the truth. The next morning, Eliza left early. Her room was tidy, the bed made. On the desk, a single note. Be back late, don't worry. The kettle clicked on by reflex. I waited for the scent of lotus tea, but it never came. The silence was total. It filled the kitchen, the hallway, my throat. I poured the water down the sink, watched the steam rise and vanish. My reflection shimmered faintly on the surface before dissolving. They wanted me afraid of exposure, of headlines, of whispers about the runaway bride who built a business out of pretending. Maybe I had been once, but fear was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I dried my hands, picked up the phone, and stared at the empty message thread. My pulse steadied. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd give them one. I typed a single line into the calendar app, right under Bridal Expo debrief. Public statement. Mirror installation demo. Invite press. Then I said it aloud, to the room, to the silence, to whoever might still be listening through the walls. They believe I'm afraid of publicity. Then meet them in the most crowded place. The morning they came, the studio already smelled of steam and roses. I'd been preparing for a first look shoot. A couple from Seattle, soft-spoken, kind. I was pinning the hem of the bride's dress when the bell above the door gave its brittle chime. I didn't look up right away. We're closed for private session, I called over my shoulder. Then we'll make it quick, a man's voice answered. The words found the soft part of my spine before I even turned. Nate. When I straightened, he was standing in the doorway with that lawyer's smile, the one that showed respect but not mercy. Behind him, Margaret, still perfect in beige and pearls, her handbag clasped like a shield. And between them, a young man in a navy suit, their new lawyer, no more than 25, slick hair, eager eyes. My assistant Jonah froze by the light stand, camera dangling. Nate laid a folder on the cutting table, fanning the papers out with surgical precision. "This is the old agreement," he said smoothly. "You remember? Intellectual property, sponsorship rights. All we need is a signature and a simple apology statement for the expo site. You do that, everything stays quiet." I removed the pin from my mouth, set it in the pincushion. "No." Margaret clicked her tongue softly, that familiar sound of disappointment polished to art. "Maeve, darling, let's not be melodramatic. You've built something admirable here, truly. But you can't teach about weddings when you've never been a wife." Her perfume was the same, powder and control. I lifted my gaze to her, voice even. I don't teach people to marry, Mrs. Rourke. I teach them to see each other. A flicker in her eyes, a small crack in the lacquer. She recovered quickly. Such poetry. But the court won't care for it. Nate slid a single photo across the table. Maybe this will help refresh your memory. The Polaroid. The same one creased, faded, the initials N. R. Still bruised into the corner. Eliza's face flashed in my mind, the way she'd looked at me through that veil. Nate's tone softened, practiced empathy curling at the edges. You've kept her in the dark too long, Maeve. Don't you think she deserves to know why you ran? What kind of woman leaves a church like a thief? He leaned closer, the paper whispering under his hand. I could show her this. Or you could come to the expo next week, smile for the cameras, make a little speech about forgiveness. Let people remember you kindly. I reached up, unclasped the silver key from my necklace, and placed it on the photo. The chain made a small metallic sigh. That's what I ran from, I said quietly. One. The room that key opened. The one where your mother was counting the envelopes marked gift money. Silence. The kind that expands until you can hear every breath. Jonah's camera gave a nervous click and stopped. He didn't even realize his finger had pressed the shutter. Nate blinked once, then laughed. A sharp exhale without joy. Rewriting history. I'm just finally reading it out loud. He straightened, jaw tight. Be careful, Maeve. You don't know who you're up against. The young lawyer cleared his throat, sensing his cue. If you refuse to sign, Mrs. Carter will have no choice but to pursue damages for defamation and breach of contract. I picked up a pen, rolled it between my fingers, then placed it flat on the folder. Then you'll have to sue me. The click of the pen against the wood sounded louder than it should have. Nate's nostrils flared. You think you're clean in all this? That running makes you pure? I met his eyes, steady. No. It just makes me free. I stopped belonging to you the minute I opened that door. Margaret exhaled a brittle laugh. Freedom doesn't suit everyone, dear. Some of us need structure. Then build yours, I said. But don't use my spine as scaffolding. She stepped forward, voice low. You'll regret this. I smiled, not kindly. I already spent 17 years doing that. The young lawyer shifted, uneasy. Mr. Rourke, perhaps. Quiet, Nate snapped. He turned back to me, searching for a weakness. You really want this fight in public? You think people will believe the runaway bride over me? People believe what they see, I said. That's why I brought mirrors. The words surprised even me. They felt like a door unlocking. Nate reached for the Polaroid again, but I slid it back toward him with the edge of my palm. Keep it, I said. You've always liked owning what isn't yours. For a moment, his composure wavered. The muscle in his jaw ticked, small and fast. Behind him, Margaret's reflection shimmered in the mirror, faint and doubled, as if she were already disappearing. Get out of my studio, I said finally. No one moved. Then Jonah spoke from the corner, voice trembling but clear. You heard her. Nate turned toward him incredulous. Excuse me? Jonah's hands were shaking on the camera, but he held his ground. If you don't leave, I'll call security. And I'll send this footage to every wedding blog in the city. The lawyer paled. Margaret gasped softly. Nate stared at me for one long second, eyes flat, calculating. Then he gathered the papers, snapping the folders shut like a gavel. You've made a mistake, Maeve. Maybe, I said, but it's mine. They left without another word. The bell over the door jingled once, then fell silent. The air they left behind was dense, metallic. Poole exhaled shakily. You okay? I looked around the studio, the mannequins, the mirrors, the thin seam of silver across the crack. Everything exactly where it should be, and completely different. I'm fine, I said, but I think the weather's changing. He nodded slowly, as if he could hear the low rumble building beneath the quiet. I picked up the key again, now cold, and looped it back around my neck. Its weight was familiar, but its meaning had shifted. Not an anchor anymore, just proof that the door behind me was locked. Before leaving, I turned off the main lights. The last thing I saw in the mirror was my own reflection, shoulders squared, eyes level, mouth unstitched. I whispered it to her, to the version of me still trembling under a veil. Don't call me a bad bride. I'm just the only one who read the party bill carefully. It began like rot, slow, invisible, until the smell arrived. 3 days after Nate's visit, a headline appeared on a bridal blog. The truth. Behind First Light's viral first look packages. No author listed, just a smirking byline. Anonymous industry insider. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation. It accused me of staging fake tears, hiring actresses to pose as brides, manipulating emotions for profit. Sources claim Maeve Carter uses emotional engineering tactics to sell luxury packages, creating crises to trigger camera-ready reactions. By noon, it had been shared 2,000 times. Neighbors began avoiding my window display. The florist next door stopped saying hello. And then came Aubrey Vale's video. She appeared in her usual pastel perfection, standing before a mirror shaped like a heart. Weddings, she said, pouting, should come from love, not lighting cues. Some people, she tilted her head, lashes fluttering, have made a career out of selling tears. Maybe that's all they ever had to sell. 500,000 views in 12 hours. The comments were vicious, efficient. So fake. Didn't her ex leave her? Runaway brides shouldn't teach loyalty. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I began collecting. I dug through my old files boxes, labeled Invoices 2008-2010, folders I hadn't opened since the divorce. There it was, a carbon copy of the transfer orders from my wedding day, the ones routing the gift contributions to Rourke Hall events. Every signature in black ink. Nate's, Margaret's, the event manager's, but not mine. Next, I reopened the email that had haunted me. First look is a lie. I printed it out, circled the sender's domain, and traced it to a dummy server used by PR firms. One of them had the name Vale Media Collective. Then, the Expo bylaws. A 47-page PDF downloaded quietly from their website. Section 18. All sponsors assume equal liability in case of fraud or misrepresentation. Meaning, if one partner fell, the other fell with them. Piece by piece, it was coming together. The Rourke-Vale partnership wasn't just for publicity, it was a laundering of names, of narratives. He was using her face to polish his reputation. She was using his power to legitimize hers. And both were using me as the villain their story required. Eliza noticed, of course. She always did. One evening she came home and set her backpack down too gently. "Mom," she said, "someone at school showed me a clip. That influencer? Aubrey something. She said you faked people's emotions." I kept my voice steady. "Will you believe her?" She hesitated. "I don't know what to believe. You never told me what really happened." I wanted to say everything. That I had once stood in a church with a key in my hand and realized marriage, for me, was a lock, not a door. That truth costs more than silence but lasts longer. Instead, I said, "You'll know soon." "Soon when?" "When the lights are brightest." She frowned, not understanding, and went to her room. The scent of her shampoo lingered in the hallway, a quiet, human thing in the middle of all this noise. The next morning, the first client cancellation arrived by email. "Dear Miss Carter, after recent reports, we've decided to postpone our booking indefinitely. We wish you well." By afternoon, there were 3 more. Jonah came into my office with his phone in hand, eyes wide. "They're tagging you in everything. We're trending under fake first look." "Let them," I said. He blinked. "You're not going to release a statement?" "Not yet." I pulled the blinds down halfway, the sunlight cutting the room into stripes. On the cutting table lay the printed invoices, the email, the expo rules. All the proof I needed, waiting like uncut fabric. "What are you going to do?" Jonah asked quietly. "Tailor a scene they can't edit." That night I wrote an invitation on thick ivory cardstock. The same stock we used for client vow prints. Simple font, no flourish. First Light Studio presents a live restoration. Truth, stitched in real-time location. Bridal Expo. Main stage time. Saturday, 7,000 p.m. Special guests. Local press and wedding media. I slipped copies under the office doors of every major wedding journalist in Portland. I mailed one to the editor of Bridal Beacon, one to the owner of the florist who'd stopped saying hello, and one, just one, to Rourke and Vale Partners. For the envelope addressed to Nate, I used my old handwriting. The same looping cursive from our engagement thank you cards. Only a ghost's signature. By the next morning, the whispers had turned into a storm. Aubrey posted another clip. Apparently, Maeve Carter's hosting some kind of performance piece at the expo. Maybe she'll finally admit she staged everything, including her own heartbreak. The comments laughed, demanded tickets, speculated. They didn't realize they'd just RSVP'd. I stood in the center of my studio, surrounded by gowns on hangers, and felt an odd calm. Each dress looked like a witness waiting to testify. The mirror reflected me as I was. Tired, yes, but sharp at the edges now. The crack I'd painted silver gleamed like a seam of light. Jonah walked in holding coffee. "Oh, you sure about this?" "Completely," I said. "If they want a show, I'll give them one. They like drama under chandeliers." He gave a short laugh, part admiration, part fear. "You call it exposure therapy." He nodded, then lowered his voice. And if it backfires?" I picked up the silver key from my desk, feeling its cool weight. "Then at least I'll choose the lighting." Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the river. Rain was starting. I stacked the folders, labeled them in black marker. Rourke transfers, Vale emails, Expo bylaws. Evidence turned props. Truth turned stage design. When I turned off the studio lights, the silver line in the mirror caught the last reflection of the window, a narrow streak of brightness cutting through the dark. I whispered to it, to the ghosts of every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet. If they liked the lights, I turned them all on. Jonah showed up at the studio after dark with the expression of someone holding bad news in a paper cup. His hoodie was soaked from the fog, curls plastered to his forehead. "You said you wanted me to dig?" he began, shaking off rain. "So I did." He set his laptop on the cutting table and opened it to the familiar image. That Polaroid. The girl on the church steps, the blurred initials in the corner. My own face turned away from the lens. Even after all these years, it looked like someone else's story that just happened to wear my bones. "I ran a metadata recovery on the scan," Jonah said, pushing the computer toward me. "Had to rebuild some of the damaged fields, but I found a signature embedded in the original film stock. Look." In the top right of the screen, rows of pale text appeared. Date: August 9, 2008. Location: St. Bridget Church, Kennebunkport, Maine. Photographer: Aubrey Vale. I blinked. Aubrey Vale? The Aubrey Vale? He nodded, nervous. Back then she wasn't famous. She interned for a PR firm, Rourke and Vale Communications, the same agency that handled the expo this year. The air around us thinned, sharper with every breath. So she was there. She took the picture. Jonah hesitated, then clicked open another file. An invoice scan, yellowed at the edges, labeled Consulting Case Study. Rourke Family Campaign. The client line read, Margaret Rourke. The amount, $5,000. The memo. Photojournalistic capture of event narrative for image rehabilitation. But event narrative, I whispered. He met my eyes. Your wedding. The room tilted just a little. The mannequin seemed to lean closer, listening. The iron on the counter hissed like an intake of breath. Jonah kept talking, voice steady. From what I can piece together, they hired the PR firm weeks before the ceremony. Margaret paid Aubrey to stage a crisis story, a bride with cold feet, abandoning the altar, a noble groom left heartbroken. They wanted a hook for a campaign about resilience and family law. Nate's firm used it to build his brand. I sank into the nearest chair. The fabric on the seat was still warm from the iron, but my hands were ice. They turned me into marketing. The words barely came out. They turned me into their lesson. Jonah scrolled through emails he'd recovered from a corrupted archive. Look at this. Subject line. Look is a lie. Sent from Aubrey's old company address. She used it as the title for a PR workshop the following year. That's where the phrase came from. I remembered the anonymous email I'd received weeks ago with the same line and the same photo. Not a warning then. A souvenir. So it wasn't a coincidence, I murmured. It was her signature. Jonah zoomed in on the metadata again. The file was re-uploaded to a cloud server 3 months ago, right before the expo. Quas is did. Guess who had access? Nate, I said. And Aubrey. Exactly. He looked at me, searching my face. They're recycling the story. Using it again, this time to frame you as manipulative. The crying brides, the fake emotions, all of it. It's part of a smear campaign to drive traffic to their sponsorship page. I pressed my fingers to my temples. A dull pulse throbbed behind my eyes. Every fragment of the past, the pen I'd signed with, the key I'd carried, the crack in the mirror, lined up with cruel precision. They made me the villain in a story they wrote. Jonah's voice softened. What do you want to do with this? I looked at the Polaroid on the screen. For the first time, I noticed something small at the edge of the frame. A blur of color. Someone's reflection in a car window holding a camera. It was Aubrey herself, accidentally caught in the shot. Yoon. Proof of authorship. Proof of the lie. I leaned closer until my breath fogged the glass. We'll keep everything, I said. Metadata. Invoices, emails. Every pixel. We'll print it, timestamp it, archive it in 3 places. Jonah nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. You're going to show them? Oh, I'll show them. My voice came out steady now, colder. At the expo. During my live restoration demo. He hesitated. You sure you want to do it in public? I smiled. A thin, exhausted thing. They built this story under spotlights. It's only fair. I tear it down under the same lights. Jonah exhaled. Then what should I label the drive? I thought for a moment, then said, name it, the rewrite. He saved the file. The small click of the mouse punctuating the decision. The hum of the machines around us seemed to shift, tuning to a higher pitch. Somewhere outside, thunder muttered. I picked up the printed invoice and the screenshot of the metadata. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were clear, bright enough to catch every reflection in the cracked mirror across the room. They thought I ran, I said quietly. But I didn't. They pushed me out, then sold tickets to watch me fall. Jonah looked at me, waiting. I slid the papers into a folder and closed it, firm. Turns out, I said, half to him, half to the ghost in the photograph, it wasn't me running, they chased me out of the photo. The mirror again, a smooth movement, the wrist leading, the torso tilted slightly like a dancer. It was symbolic. A turn of the mirror just enough to replace the person in the photo. Jonah looked at me, eyes full of worry and expectation. Again, he said, from the beginning. We played until the workshop echoed with the click of the buttons, the steady hum of the cooling fan, and the sound of my footsteps taking the audience from dream to reality. And as the show drew near, I locked the evidence box to my hand like a ring. It was warm, weighty, as if holding the evidence in my palm would steady me. The night before Expo, I stood alone in front of the mirror. Maeve looked at me, assimilating. I smiled at the person in the middle. I remembered Agnes's words, "Don't let anyone sew your mouth with white thread." I pulled up my sleeve, touched the silver paint on the back of my hand where I had carved the crack. A turn of the mirror was enough to replace the person in the photo. The bridal expo was already heaving with sound, music pulsing through ceiling speakers, camera shutters snapping like rainfall. White fabric, champagne, perfume, and ambition, all mixed into the same dizzying air. My name blared from the loudspeaker. Please welcome our special guest, Maeve Carter, the queen of the first look. Applause erupted, too bright, too hollow. I stepped onto the stage, heart steady, voice rehearsed but not fake. Behind the curtain, I saw Nate, his posture crisp, one hand in his pocket. Beside him, Aubrey Vale, haloed by the glow of her phone screen, already live-streaming to thousands. Their reflections shimmered faintly in the giant mirrored wall that formed the backdrop. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eliza stood in the crowd halfway down the aisle, clutching her camera. I met her eyes and smiled. "Come up here," I said into the mic. "Come see how your mother's work begins." A murmur rippled through the audience. How sweet, how modern. Mother and daughter, mentors and muses. They didn't know what was coming. Eliza joined me, awkward under the lights. I rested a hand on her shoulder. "Every first look," I began, "is built on light and reflection. Light can also lie. Lust per stando." I gestured to the 3-panel mirror at center stage. Its wings folded inward, catching the spotlight. "This is my favorite teaching tool," I said, turning to the crowd. "Middle panel faces you, your truth. The two sides reflect what you choose to show." Aubrey panned her phone toward me, eyes glinting. Nate gave a small approving nod, thinking this was just another performance. I looked into the camera lens, the one streaming live to every bridal network, and said evenly, "Before a bride meets her groom, let's allow truth to meet the light." Then I nodded toward Jonah, who stood near the control board. He hit the switch. The stage darkened for half a second, then the mirror panels flipped open. 2 LED screens blazed to life. The left displayed a scanned bank transfer. Rourke Hall Events. $5,000 from Margaret Rourke. The right screen showed the Polaroid metadata. Date, August 9, 2008. Photographer, Aubrey Vale. A hush sliced through the noise. I heard a few gasps. One camera clattered to the floor. On Aubrey's phone stream, the comments exploded too fast to read. Then the center panel lit up, revealing the email thread. Subject line: "First look is a lie." The sender address: a corporate alias. But the recovery log flashing at the bottom was unmistakable. mrourkevalapere.com. The crowd stirred. Wait, that's his mother's name. This was a setup? She was the runaway bride, wasn't she? Aubrey froze mid-livestream, phone sagging. And Nate, always the lawyer, walked calmly onto the stage, microphone in hand, smile fixed. "This is absurd," he said, voice rising over the crowd. "These are doctored images, cheap tricks. You're slandering professionals, Maeve. You can call your lawyers. You can call your mother, but you can't sue Light for showing what it sees." That made people laugh. Not the kind of laugh that helps you, but the kind that turns the crowd. The cameras kept rolling. Calm cracked. "You don't know what you're doing." "Ooh," I said softly, for the first time in 17 years. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "End this now or I'll tell her." "Eliza?" I said, before he could finish. "She's already here." Eliza's voice, small but steady, cut through the air. "Mom, you ran away for the money?" All the sounds around us, the buzz of lights, the hum of cameras faded to nothing. I looked at her. At the daughter who had carried my silence without knowing it. "No," I said. "Mom ran away to not sell her name." She nodded slowly. Her eyes shimmered, not from confusion this time, but understanding. Behind her, the screen kept cycling through the proof emails, invoices, the metadata signature where Aubrey's name sat like a bruise. The story I'd been running from was now public, irreversible. Nate's face tightened. "You're humiliating yourself," he hissed. I turned back to the audience, raising the mic once more. "No," I said. "I'm restoring myself. I built a career teaching people how to stage the moment they first see each other. But that day at St. Bridget's..." I looked at the crowd, then at Nate. I realized I hadn't seen who was standing beside me. A ripple of silence spread through the hall. Even the stage lights seemed to dim in deference. I met Nate's eyes for the last time. "That's why I didn't say I do," I said. My voice was calm, almost tender. Because that day, I hadn't yet seen who was who. The audience held its breath. Flashbulbs exploded. Somewhere, a journalist shouted for my full name. Aubrey turned off her phone, face pale. Nate dropped the mic and walked off stage, the applause chasing him like surf retreating from shore. Eliza came closer, sliding her hand into mine. Her grip was small, fierce. I exhaled, the first real breath I'd taken in years. The mirror behind us glowed with its own fractured light, no longer reflecting what was in front of it, but everything that had been hidden behind. The truth had met the light. And it hadn't burned. It had clarified. I turned to the crowd one last time and said, quietly but clearly, "Thank you for witnessing a different kind of first look." The room erupted not in shock anymore, but in release. And for the first time since the day I ran from that church, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. The hall had emptied hours ago, but my pulse was still ringing with the echo of clapping camera shutters and one thin crack of glass that had sounded like applause breaking into truth. By the time I got back to the studio, the air smelled of rain and cold dust. I turned off the security light and let the dark settle. The only glow came from the silver seam on the 3-panel mirror, the one I had painted weeks before. Under the faint streetlight, the seam didn't look like a scar anymore. It looked like a line of embroidery, a piece of handiwork that had always meant to be there. I pulled the mirror down from the wall. The frame groaned, wood dry and old, but it held. I laid it flat across the cutting table and wiped away the fingerprints and flecks of powder from the expo. The silver stripe gleamed where the rag touched it, the way satin catches light at the fold. I could see my reflection ripple along the curve of the glass, eyes swollen from the day, hair escaping its pins, lipstick gone. A woman undone, but finally aligned with herself. The kettle clicked on in the back room. I measured out a pinch of lotus tea, Eliza's favorite, and poured hot water over it. The scent rose slowly, soft and floral, filling the studio with warmth that reached deeper than heat. For a while I just stood there, hands around the cup, watching the steam move like breath. The quiet was dense, almost physical. My bones ached, my shoulders screamed from holding composure too long, yet my chest felt open, empty, but clean. Like someone had cut the laces of a corset I didn't know I'd been wearing. I sat down on the floor beside the mirror, knees pulled to my chest. The silence hummed in my ears. Outside, traffic faded to a low tide. I thought of the audience's faces when the screens had lit up. The intake of breath, the quick rush of voices, the sound of 100 people seeing a lie split in two. And then Eliza's small, trembling hand finding mine. She'd looked at me with that question still lingering in her eyes. Mom ran away for the wedding money? And I'd said it clearly, into the microphone, into every phone recording and every headline that would follow. Mom ran away to keep from selling her name. It hadn't been revenge. It had been release. The door creaked open behind me. Eliza's steps were cautious on the wood. I didn't turn. I could tell it was her from the soft rhythm of her breath. She came close and knelt beside me, setting something on the table. The Polaroid. The same old one, creased, faded, the ghost of the runaway bride on the steps of Saint Some Saint. Bridget. Only this time, a new Polaroid lay on top of it, fresh white edges still curling from the print. 2 figures sat side by side under the studio light, me and her. No veils, no posing, just tired smiles and eyes red from the same truth. "Mom," she said quietly, "take this. This will be the first picture of the 2 of us, without anyone standing behind us." Tgh. My throat tightened. I reached out and ran a thumb over the smooth surface. The image was still damp. It smelled faintly of chemicals and tea. She handed me the camera. "Go on," she said, half smiling. "One more, for luck." I raised it, framed her face in the viewfinder. For a moment, the flash reflected in her eyes, and I saw myself there, smaller, clearer, real. The shutter clicked, a soft mechanical sigh. When the photo slid out, we watched it develop together. The colors bled into being, no blur, no ghosting, just us. I pinned both pictures to the corkboard above the cutting table, the past and the present, side by side. The old one no longer looked tragic. It looked distant, like an artifact reclaimed. The new one gleamed under the thin strip of silver light seeping through the blinds. Eliza leaned her head on my shoulder. "Feels quiet," she murmured. "It is," I said. "That's what freedom sounds like." She didn't answer, and she didn't need to. We stayed like that until the tea went cold. Later, when she'd gone to bed, I walked back to the mirror one last time. The silver seam caught the faintest thread of dawn creeping through the window. I touched it with a fingertip, tracing the curve from top to bottom. It shimmered under my nail, smooth and sure. The world outside was beginning to stir. The city's first hum, a car door closing, the thump of newspaper on a doorstep. And inside, everything was still. And in that stillness, I understood what I had bought back tonight wasn't vengeance or victory. It was silence. The good kind. The kind that means nothing more has to be explained. I turned off the kettle, locked the door, and let the darkness settle around me once more. The studio smelled of tea and satin and something faintly electric, like a wire cooling after a long burn. Freedom does not make a loud noise. It is as silent as the thread slipping from a needle. R. Subject, herself. In the evenings, I often stroll around the workshop. The windows of other classrooms are lit yellow. Ceramics, painting, scented candles. I pass by and hear people laughing. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm on the outside. When I return to the room, the mirror reflects me in the window frame, surrounded by warm light. I understand. Freedom is not a grand spectacle, but the ability to sit quietly in your own space without asking anyone's permission. I light a candle, make lotus tea, open the student attendance book. It reads, Mirror Lab. Session 2, 12. First, look for survivors. Below is a list of women who have said, I'm not beautiful enough to show up. I smile. Wait and see, I whisper. When the lights come on, everyone will see themselves glowing. That night, as the wind blew through the window, I hung the Polaroid photo of mother and son back on the wall, right below the silver lettering I had just written, Let light meet truth. In the photo, Eliza leaned against me, her smile undimmed. The light hit the silver inlay on the mirror, making the room look like it was embroidered with bright thread. I sat down, watching the empty classroom, my heart light. Perhaps for the first time in 17 years, I was not waiting for someone to call my name. I was creating my name, my shape, my own light. Outside, Portland was drenched in rain, the sound of drops falling evenly on the tin roof. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the water, of my breathing, of time passing without me having to chase it. I knew that from now on, many other women would walk into this room, stand before that mirror, and see what I once feared most, themselves. And when they smiled, the light reflecting off the wall, blending with the old silver pattern, I would smile along, silently knowing. I no longer looked for wedding photos. I was creating new first photos. I looked straight into the classroom camera, the lens glinting like a small, steady eye. The lights are soft tonight. No glare, no spectacle. Just enough to see a face honestly. Thank you, I say, for standing in front of the mirror with me all this time. If one day your child asks, why don't you have a wedding photo? Don't wrap yourself in the old veil of silence. Tell them about the picture you refused to take, and how that refusal became the reason you could stand beside them today, ready to capture your first real one. I pause, letting the words find their echo in the quiet room. The students' chairs are empty now, but the mirrors still hold traces of faces that once trembled, then softened, then smiled. My voice steadies. We spend so much of our lives curating moments for others, waiting for permission to appear, waiting for someone to say, now you look perfect. But maybe perfection is just the second before you stop pretending. Maybe the real first look is when you finally see yourself without rehearsal. I reach up and touch the small silver key pendant at my neck. It catches the light like a heartbeat. I used to think that freedom would sound like applause, I continue. But it doesn't. It sounds like breathing again. Then I lean a little closer to the lens. My tone softens into a question. Not rhetorical, but personal, like an invitation whispered across the glass. When you turn the mirror toward yourself, who do you see, and will you stay still for 1 second long enough to look clearly? I let the silence stretch. Somewhere in the background, the studio clock ticks once, like a shutter closing. Then I smile. If this story touched something in you, tell me about the first look you'd give yourself. Write it down. Share it with someone who might need courage to stop running. And follow along. There are other mirrors waiting, other stories that begin exactly where we once turned away. I switch off the recording light, and the camera lens dims to black. This story of mine ends here, I say quietly. But who knows, maybe this is the first picture of your own freedom.